Chapter 9. A Night on Nar Shada.
Once upon a time,
Rian said.
the Hutts did not live on Nalhuta, or on its moon Nar Shada. They lived on a planet called Val, and it was a terrible place, perfect for the Hutts. The world orbited 2 stars, Ivona and Ardos, whom the Hutts said were gods and lovers. Ivona was consumed by darkness, and Ardos, in rage, exploded, destroying all the other worlds of their system and blasting the very atmosphere from Val itself.
She tweaked the descent controls, and the traffic relays glowed green on her console for their final approach. The bow of the new Ambition dipped toward their destination.
Ivona was consumed by a black hole,
said Mander.
Ardos went nova and is now a white dwarf.
Rian ignored him.
The Hutts fled before the devastation and came to the YouTube system, and found the world Evokar, which they called Nalhuta, glorious jewel in their language. But Nalhuta was occupied by another species, the Evoshi, who welcomed them and thought to share their lands. The Hutts did not like the idea of sharing, and drove the Evochi from their world, resettling them on the largest of its moons, now called Nar Shada. And then the Hutts took over Nar Shada, the smuggler's moon, and killed all the Evoshi anyway.
I am well aware of the stories and the histories,
said Mander.
I've read them myself in the archives. You have a point?
The point,
said the Pantoran,
is that the Hutts have survived the deaths of their gods, and think of themselves as suitable replacements for those deities. They consider everyone and everything else expendable.
They had spent an inordinate amount of time in a holding pattern beyond the orbit of the smuggler's moon, waiting for permission to land. Mander thought that while Popara was a powerful force in the Indrexu sector, his was not one of the clans of the ancients, the true ruling families of this world. He was ultimately a small fish in this wider and more deadly sea. Now, coming in low among the tall spires of Nar Shada, Mander could think of nothing else but a mud wasp nest, always buzzing, always active, but with precious little planning. Nar Shada was known as both the Smuggler's Moon and as Little Coruscant, and though it had the sprawling urbanism of the former imperial capital, it had nothing of that planet's grace and organization. The towering spires of Nar Shada were thrown up without concern for their effects on one another, and as such contended for airspace among boiling rivers of air cars and floater vehicles. These traveled in only the barest semblance of the ordered air lanes of the original Coruscant, and small craft weaved and dodged among larger vehicles like the new Ambition in a twisted confusion of air skimmers, speeders, swoops, flitters, repulsor lifts, and the occasional rotorcraft. Rian muttered a curse as a glide zepp hove into their path, and Eddie's knuckles were white beneath his fur as he clenched the control yoke. They were among the top spires of the towers, and the ground was still kilometers below them.
I will see to our guest,
said Mander, and left the pilots to the perils of navigating Nar Shada's airspace at rush hour. He found Mika in the galley with Orgamon and another Nikto, the other survivors left behind to salvage what they could from the Skydove warehouse and claim salvage rights on the crashed freighter. Mika had swapped his oversized Zerapi blanket for an equally large vest, brocaded in gold stitching. The two Niktos were sponging the hut with a concoction that smelled like rotting flowers.
We will be landing in a few minutes,
Mander said.
The air traffic is difficult.
Mika nodded.
The air traffic is always bad. Hutts take it as a good sign when no one has time to obey traffic laws.
He waved off his 2 supplicants with an instruction in Huttese to gather his belongings. Mander remained.
Your companion, the Pantoran,
said the Hutt.
Rayan Irana.
Said Mander.
She is the sister of a Jedi, no?
Asked Mika.
Does she have the power within her as well?
She is Toro Irana's sister.
Said Mander.
And while the Force can be strong in family lines, she does not have either the aptitude or the training of her brother.
Yes, the aptitude,
Mika said. Then,
the brother, he is truly dead?
Yes.
Mander said quietly.
And these Bomu, these Rhodians, they killed him,
said the Hutt.
I think so. Toro was...
Mander thought for a moment on how much he should tell the Hutt, then said,
poisoned. Drugged with Tempest. He fell from a great height.
I am sorry,
said Mika, and lowered his eyes, almost in respect.
That would explain much, then.
Much?
Asked Mander.
The young female,
said Mika.
She was very curious about the cargo of the plague ship. She asked the CSA lieutenant commander much about it, and about what the corporate sector knew about the Tempest spice. Angela Kryn, in turn, asked me, and I provided what information I could. But I find it interesting.
How so?
Said Mander. The Hutt let out a nervous hiccup.
The man you sent to negotiate with my father is killed with this Tempest spice. And the plague ship, I find, was carrying this spice as well. Surely there has to be a connection. The galaxy is too large for such a coincidence, such a twist of fate.
Hence the questions about the Bomu clan,
said Mander. Mika the Hutt gnawed on his lower lip.
I will check this out once I talk to my father. I don't know if we use the Bomu clan in our dealings or not. Something is going on, though, and if we are not aware of what it is, we are at a disadvantage. I don't like it.
Neither do I,
said Mander.
If there is anything you can do to find out who is ultimately responsible, I would be most appreciative.
Mika nodded in agreement, but the Jedi did not make to leave the room. Mika looked at him.
There is something else?
Mander frowned, wondering how to best approach the subject.
Back on Endragod, when we were attacked by the Swoop Gang.
An experience I hope never to relive,
put in Mika, though he smiled as he said it.
Your help was greatly appreciated,
said Mander.
But at the end, that last swooper had you dead in his sights.
Yes?
He missed you.
You shouted out a warning?
Noted Mika.
Not in time,
said Mander.
Besides, you were ducking before I got a chance to shout.
I was most fortunate then,
said Mika.
I guess sometimes there just is a twist of fate.
And with that, Mika the Hutt closed his eyes, a sign of dismissal. Mander would have pressed, but a string of Bothan curses erupted from the cockpit, and he went forward to lend what moral support he could to the pilots. He did note that Mika called his order the Jedi, and not the Huttese Jedi. As Lieutenant Commander Kryn had noted, Mika was a very odd Hutt. After what seemed like a small eternity, the bulk of the new ambition nosed its way through the traffic and settled at last on a landing pad thrown out from one of the lower spires. The durasteel supports groaned under the ship's weight, and a stricken look crossed Rayan's face at the idea that the pad could collapse, casting them into the Hutt-made canyons below. The supports held, though, and Eddie began deactivating systems and setting controls to standby. Both spacers slung their blasters at their belts.
Landing pad X1256 AEB,
said Eddie.
Remember the number if we get lost and split up.
Mander let Mika lead the way down the landing ramp, the Jedi, Pantoran, and Bothan following, and the 2 Niktos bringing up the rear. They were greeted by another pair of Niktos, these armed with blaster carbines, each flanking a green protocol droid, one of Vago's H3POs.
"Young Master Mika,"
said the droid, followed by a cascade of Hutties that Mander followed along as best he could. The gist of it was how valiant young Mika had been in adverse situations, how fortunate it had been for those on Endrigod that he had been present, and how wise mighty Popara had been to enlist the aid of such competent employees as the others that now followed in his illustrious wake. Then the droid turned to Mander and the others.
"A feast has been prepared in your honor to celebrate Mika's return. You will accompany me, and I will bring you to Popara's tower."
As he was about to accept the invitation, Mander caught a gleam of something on the catwalks over the entrance. He had been too slow before on Endrigod. This time, he did manage to shout a warning before the sniper squeezed off a series of shots. Mander dropped to a crouch, lightsaber up. And alongside him, both Rayan and Eddie had their blasters in hand. The Niktos converged on Mika, who fell back a few steps behind their protection. The H3PO unit had no such protection, and as it turned to look, it took a blaster bolt to the head. The cranial housing shattered under the force of the shot, and the now headless droid staggered a few paces before collapsing. Both Rayan and Eddie returned fire, but there was nothing after the initial shots. Mika motioned the bodyguards forward, and Orgamon and the others stalked to the entrance. They looked back and shook their heads. Mika returned to the new ambition, while the Niktos chattered on comms. Mika frowned and looked at the jade remains of the droid.
Not the homecoming I expected.
Reinforcements arrived in the form of an entire squad of Nikto family retainers, along with another H3PO unit. Mander recognized this one from the dent in its temple, and wondered if the Hutasei household had gotten a deal on buying the droids in bulk, or merely taken over the factory producing them. This H3PO unit remained behind to oversee the cleanup of its brother protocol unit, with half the squad. The other half closed ranks about Mika and the others, and marched through twisted passages and over bridges, crossing steep permacrete canyons. At each new juncture, the Niktos sent in advance scouts to make sure the area and its inhabitants were not hostile. Mander noticed that despite the blaster carbines being waved about, few of the other inhabitants of the towers even paid attention to their presence, and those who did reacted by simply getting out of the way. Apparently, such activities were common on the Smuggler's Moon, in particular when the Hutts were involved.
Did you get a good look at the shooter?
Asked Rayan during one of the frequent stops as the Niktos were clearing the way.
Not a good one.
Said Mander.
I saw a thin, narrow head. I think our attacker was a Syrian, but other than that, nothing.
So why take a shot at Mika?
Asked Rayan.
You think that someone is worried about what he found out on Endrigod?
Possible.
Said Mander.
Or someone wants to send a message to Mika, or perhaps even to Popara.
A high-energy message.
A message nonetheless.
Mander continued, realizing as he did that he was scanning the surrounding arcades as well, expecting another attack.
Why else hire a bad assassin on the Smuggler's Moon?
Rayan thought about it.
You're right, you wouldn't. Hire a bad assassin, that is. This place is overflowing with capable opportunists who would not hesitate to take a contract.
Exactly.
Said Mander.
Yet we were fired upon by a sniper who literally missed the broadside of a hut. A small hut, but a hut nonetheless.
Rayan thought for a moment, then added,
But said sniper then nails a protocol droid in the temple. Heck of a bad shot. Unless Mika wasn't the target.
I think someone wants us to think he was,
said Mander.
but I don't think he was the one they were paid to shoot. Like I said, they are sending a message.
The trio was brought up several more turbo lifts into one of the larger nearby towers. As they rose higher into Popara's home territory, the surroundings became more opulent. The rugs took on a deeper plush. The fittings became gaudier, and the light fixtures changed from simple domes to crystalline forms that cast hut-shaped shadows on the walls. Finally, they reached the last doors, huge vault-like monstrosities of heavy wood and metal, emblazoned with Popara's beneficent face. Only then did Mika turn to address them.
I must meet with my father,
he said.
I had forwarded a report earlier, but he may have further questions. And he will want to know about the most recent incident. We will meet again at the Fate. We will be serving in the penthouse at sunset.
And with that, the Hutt took his leave, swallowed by the opulent doors to his father's chambers. The three travelers were shown to a small suite of rooms to freshen up. A tailor droid was made available, and both Rayen and Eddie availed themselves of its services. Mander had brought his formal robes with him, and while the other two were talking about fabrics and color swatches, he stepped out onto a wide balcony. The best parts of Nar Shada were dingier than the worst parts of Coruscant. Despite himself, Mander tried to find some order among the madness of the towers, each one equipped with balconies, galleries, bridges, overlooks, awnings, verandas, and decks of various levels of functionality and form. Some seemed to be landing pads, while others looked like they had no other purpose than to cast the floors beneath them in shadow. Mander looked down, but wasn't sure he could even see the ground. Rather, the towers themselves expanded out until they became a second skin to the moon. Welling up from those depths and dancing around the towers were a plethora of vehicles, again ranging from the nondescript repulsor vans to gaudy sign blimps, offering every vice and service known to sentient life. And above it all, hanging corpulent and visible even in the late afternoon sun, was Nar Shada itself, a rotten fruit that was now home to the Hutts. Few Outworlders were welcome to the steaming swamp estates of the Hutt overlords, though Mander did not doubt that the Hutasei clan had their own dacha somewhere on the planet above him. A day on Nar Shada was 87 standard hours long, so they planned on a nap and a light meal, though the meal was light only in terms that a Hutt could appreciate. It was in effect a portable buffet consisting of a large platter of sliced bantha rump, roasted with tigmari, stewed kibrut, flatbread, spice loaf of various intensities, and inert piles of mounder potato rice. For Eddie, a bland-looking fish called salar was presented, and the Bothan declared it better prepared than most. At the center of the display was a spice jelly cast in a mold that resembled Popara's beneficent form. The Efricum worms were served with both heads still attached and went untouched by all. Over the meal, Mander said,
I understand that the lieutenant commander offered you a job.
Rayen looked up from the bowl of thick soup she had been eating and shot a glance at Eddie.
See,
she said.
He did think we were talking about him.
To Mander, she said,
She seemed interested in the trade in Tempest spice, particularly after she talked with the Huttling.
Had she spent a lot of time speaking with Mika?
Asked Mander.
Don't be jealous,
said Rayen.
The lieutenant commander spent a lot of time talking to you, and you didn't see me get all offended.
You told me you didn't want to talk.
Mander bit the inside of his cheek to keep from sounding foolish.
So?
He started again.
I understand that the lieutenant commander offered you a job.
Rayen nodded.
Mika apparently got her very interested in the Tempest. She wanted to know if we were interested in helping investigate.
Are you?
asked Mander. Rayen held up a finger and swallowed a particularly large lump of something in the soup.
Absolutely. We find the source of the Tempest and we find Toro's killer. Not that I don't want to help you as well. But 2 approaches maybe are better than 1. And the CSA has greater resources. But...
Here it comes,
said Eddie, eyeing another piece of salar.
I don't know if I trust her,
said Rayen.
And you trust me?
Noted Mander.
Enough to accept the coordinates of the Indrexu spiral in exchange for a little risking of one's life?
She asked.
Of course. Besides, people are supposed to trust you. You're a Jedi.
So people keep telling me,
said Mander.
though I'm not the Jedi they expect, apparently.
True, but beside the point,
said Rayen.
The point is that Kryn laid out her offer in very precise terms. It all felt very cut and dried, very calculated. Very...
Bloodless was the word you used,
said Eddie, tucking into another piece of the fish.
I know I don't trust her much,
said Rayen.
but not trusting her wouldn't keep me from accepting a job.
Mander nodded. It seemed clear to him that Rayen was leaving, but had not fully realized it herself. And she was right about one thing. There would be more resources available with the CSA than with a single Jedi. Still, he could not see her fitting in neatly with the by-the-book, bloodless nature of the corporate sector.
You'd work for them even if it didn't get you closer to your goal,
said Mander. Rayen shrugged.
Look at how I feel about the Hutts. It doesn't stop me from eating their food.
And with that, conversation drifted off to other matters, and left the ultimate decision, like the Ephraim worms, unfinished. Deep in the bowels of Nar Shada, a beeper chimed at Coax's belt. The one-eyed Clatuinian moved back to her sleeping pod and activated the privacy filters. Standard issue models, but easily modded to actually provide the privacy they claimed. The small room secure, she pulled out the portable holo receiver from beneath her bunk and toggled it on. Her lord's image appeared on the central display. As always, the Spice Lord's hulking form was lit from behind, facial features invisible. Any who might observe their conversation would only be able to tell that Coax was speaking with a Hutt, its pointed triangular head rising from a heavy, neckless body.
"My lorda,"
said Coax, nodding her head slightly and closing her one organic eye in respect.
"it has been too long."
Said the Hutt, in a voice filtered to a tinny hum by the device.
Market penetration of the corporate sector authority proceeds apace.
Said Coax.
The Tempest is extremely popular, and there is sufficient corruption in the bureaucracy to allow us to establish a foothold. Several small-time dealers have tried to sell lesser spices dyed to look like Tempest, but those same corrupt authorities have cracked down on them.
The shadowed form nodded, and for a moment Coax felt reassured. She had pleased the Spice Lord. The Hutt said.
Recovering nicely after the loss of the ship on Endragod.
Said the Clatuinian.
With the Corellians vulnerable, we subcontracted out to several smaller, lighter firms. And we are breaking up the supply chain, such that the same ships that bring in the raw spice are not the ones that take out the finished product.
Said the darkened Hutt. and it sounded as if the Spice Lord was quoting older wisdom.
The ships that are carrying the spice out are highly vetted before we give them the coordinates for our secret path,
said Coax.
And those coming in system are running empty cargo bays, and as such are not breaking any laws,
said the Spice Lord.
The requisite bribes have been issued,
said Coax, toggling a small chip along the side of the receiver. A blue-white spreadsheet appeared in the air between her and the hut's image.
As you can see, they are well within our budgetary expectations, with marginal impact on our bottom line,
said the hut churlishly.
Of course, my lorda,
said the Clatuinian, regretting almost instantaneously the implication that the hut did not understand economics. Seeking to put herself back into the Spice Lord's good graces, she added,
the weapons that were discovered near the manufacturing ship. We cannibalized about half the parts to get the other half operational,
said the Clatuinian.
They were in amazing condition for being so old,
said the silhouetted form. The Spice Lord was pleased again, and that brought a warmth to the Clatuinian's heart.
There was a split in the organization we were dealing with, our longtime distributor and one of her daughters. I evaluated the offers from both sides and found the daughter's offer to be better for us. Her mother and her mother's supporters have been eliminated and operations consolidated under the daughter, and I have rerouted the drug owed to Makemte to our new ally as a reward,
said the Spice Lord.
They are on subsistence drops for the moment,
said Coax.
Their bungling brought the attention of the Jedi down upon us,
said the backlit image.
As per your orders, I have also made contacts with the Bomu matriarch, and she has sent support as well,
said the hut. Despite herself, Coax's hand went to the oversized hip pouch on her belt. The lightsaber weighed heavy against her side. Even in the shadowed profile, she was sure the hut caught her motion and was amused by it.
Shall I bring it to you?
She asked. Said the Spice Lord quickly. Again, Coax bowed.
As you wish,
said the hut, and broke the link. Coax collapsed on the bunk of the sleeping pod. She could have said that the Bomu were getting particularly hard to deal with, that their matriarch proposed increasingly direct and dangerous methods of vengeance, but that was something her lord did not need to know. All the Spice Lord needed to be informed of was that the requested support was in position. The control of that support was her problem. Coax had riled up the Bomu clan, and now, upon the Spice Lord's command, was going to unleash them on the Jedi. Maybe it would be enough to end this particular threat. And who knew, perhaps each would wipe out the other and solve all of their problems. If the Bomu happened to be particularly enthusiastic in their work, who was she to fault them? The one-eyed Klatooinian reached into her hip pouch and pulled out the Spice Lord's prize. The metal hilt of the dead Jedi's lightsaber glittered in the weak light of the sleeping pod. She thought about turning it on, feeling the power that radiated through it, but demurred. There was little enough room in the sleeping pod for herself and the HoloLink, and she would likely achieve nothing more than shredding the surrounding walls, and that might attract undue attention. She had met the Spice Lord but once in the flesh, and when they met, the Hutt had said simply,
"Protect me."
Since that day, she labored to keep her master's empire intact, despite long periods without contact, and to be ready, at a moment's notice, to carry out the Spice Lord's will. And if the Spice Lord desired a Jedi lightsaber, who was she to argue? She replaced the Spice Lord's trophy, packed up the holo receiver, returned the security screens to their factory-issued insufficiency, and left the pod. She had to rally the Spice Lord's hounds in the hope that they would remove one more problem from her list. The dream returned to Mander, but this time with a difference. He was in the great library on Coruscant again, and this time he was not alone. There were voices around him now. Unseen among the dimly lit records on the shelves, he looked down one corridor of the stacks, then another, but there was nothing there. The voices sounded like a celebration. The voices sounded like a discussion. The voices sounded like a heated argument. In the distance, a low bell pealed, as always. And turning around, he could see the lights go out, a darkness claiming the shelves one at a time. Yet this time he could see in the distance a single light shining in the darkness. It was the blaze of a lightsaber, blue-white in the darkness. Mander started for the light, moving in that dream speed where his mind was running, but the world around him moved slowly. The darkened shelves were now mere ghosts, reflecting their own pale illumination. And Mander noticed they were empty. The light receded and bobbed. And he could hear footsteps ahead, retreating, fleeing him. He was closing now, and nearing that moment of recognition, when he knew this was a dream, and a familiar one. But that did not stop him from pursuing the bobbing light.
This is a dream,
thought Mander.
This is a dream, and I can affect it. I can catch up with my opponent. I can make him slow down.
The thin line of the lightsaber's blade paused up ahead, and for just a second, Mander could see that it reflected a blue face, looking at him, frustrated and angry. Then his prey moved off to one side, down one of the long rows of the now darkened stacks. Mander realized the voices were gone, along with the tolling bell and the sound of footsteps. Mander reached for his own blade, and it came up in his hand. Not a serpent this time, but a hard, cold hilt that chilled him as he ran a thumb over the raised switch and ignited it. He spun around the corner, and there was a crate in the middle of the aisle. A typical crate, like the ones found in the Bomu warehouse. The top was open, and there, swaddled in a blanket, was a small hut child, its flesh a pale blue. The hut opened its eyes, and Mander had a moment of disorientation.
Hello?
Said Mika Hutase in flawless basic. Mander bolted awake, startled from the dream. Despite the drawn shades, the light of the westering sun still carved thin lines on the opposing wall, and even with the supposed soundproofing, the dull rumble of the air traffic outside seeped through the permacrete and into his bones. He rolled out of the bed, shook his head, and pinched the bridge of his nose, trying both to shake the fogginess from his brain, while at the same time retaining what had happened in the dream. Part of it was obvious. Toro had been running away from him. Despite his teachings, he had rejected him. Once he had attained his own knighthood, Toro had sought to carve his own path, a path that led to his own destruction. But Mander had put the details of his former student's death aside to finish Toro's assigned task for the Order. He had hoped that gaining the coordinates would give him some sense of closure, and that by completing his student's task, he could lay Toro's spirit to rest. But it was not to be. Too many loose ends strayed out of this particular tangle, not the least of them being that Tempest was more widespread than the Jedi had first thought. This was no failing of a single Jedi, or a single Jedi's training, but a plague in its own right, sprawling out in the galactic arm unnoticed until now. Then there was a matter of Mika. The strange hut was a part of his unease. There was more to Mika than he'd first thought, and the fact that there was Tempest on the plague ship where he was found. Another mystery, tempting him. The hut's involvement could be part of the greater picture, or just another distraction. He wondered how the discussion would go between Mika and his father about the Tempest. Would Popara see the rise in Tempest use as a threat, or as an opportunity? Rayan's words about not trusting huts came back to him. Would Popara be willing to help the Jedi track down and eradicate this scourge? Then there was the matter of the CSA and Angela Kryn. They seemed very interested in the Tempest as well. Again, Mika seemed invaluable in having spurred that interest. Mander wondered if he should encourage Rayan to work with them. It would free up the Jedi to conduct his own work, or allow him to simply return to the archives if matters were truly in capable hands. Mander Zuma shook his head again and padded out to join the others for a light, for Hut's snack, before the main meal. In his absence, the tailored droids had arrived with new outfits. Rayan had chosen a practical outfit of deep violet spacer's slacks with matching vest, both highlighted by white piping. A silver-gray shirt of Dramasian shimmer silk blended well with her azure skin, and she had touched up her facial tattoos with ochre powder. She still had her holster, but apparently had left the blaster on her ship. Eddie, on the other hand, had chosen a bulky, open-fronted tunic with padded shoulders, worn over a ruffled white shirt. Just as the sun, blood crimson from pollutants, touched the horizon, the dented H3PO unit came to escort them to the party. The droid buzzed with something that resembled excitement.
Generous Popara, may his name always be praised by his clients, has a number of guests this evening and will be holding audiences throughout the meal. Many of the guests would like to meet you as well, as word of your exploits has spread. Would you be opposed to sitting at different tables?
Mander started to respond, but Eddie put in quickly.
We would prefer it that way. We have seen enough of one another while crammed into our ship, and would enjoy new company.
Mander looked at the Bothan and nodded. If they were talking to different guests, they could gain more information. The assassination attempt was a message. Perhaps the one who sent that message would be present. The penthouse was not quite at the tip of the tower's spire, but occupied an entire floor close to it. A turbolift deposited them at one end of a large room ringed with windows overlooking the city. On one side, the setting sun was being overtaken by the girth of Nalhuta. Out the other set of windows, the city moon was already in shadow, alive with its own brilliances of signs and lights. Across the far side of the room, a translucent white wall reached from side to side with two great sliding screens. Against the screens, they could see the shadows of Popara, Mika, and a third hut with a narrow triangular head moving about in animated discussion. The room itself was an assemblage of guests and bodyguards. Each of the crescent-shaped tables was dominated by a hut. Mander noted Syrians, Bims, and a pair of male Twi'leks. Rayan pointed out a table with several Rhodians with a subtle nod of her head. Popara's Nyktos lined the wall behind Mander and the others. Xanos was there with his Wookiees, and to Mander's eyes he had already dipped deep into the Kashyyyk ale with his furry companions. The eyes of Popara, the hut's eldest son, widened when they came in, then reduced back to slits. The hulking hut muttered something to one of the Wookiees and turned back to his drink. The spread was, if anything, more indulgent than the catered meal delivered to their quarters earlier. Platters of hut delicacies littered the tables, including braised fork tarts, sand gizzards, and strained ciabattas. Small bowls of crunch bugs peeped softly in the center of the table. Live tusquets were kept in cages on hand near each of the hut guests as a palate cleanser. African worms were served heads on and consumed in one gulp, though only by the huts. Mander was unsure if several dishes were intended as food, utensils, or table decorations. Each table was dominated by a larger spice jelly crafted to look like Popara, Xanos, and Mika together. One happy family captured in suspended gelatin. In addition to the Kashyyyk ale, there were heavy pitchers of Boga Noga and Gardula, next to fluted crystal ewers of what looked like clear, fresh water. The back wall slid open and the three huts emerged. Vago came first, heading directly to the turbolift, one of her ubiquitous jade-green droids in tow, apparently too busy for the festivities. Then Mika, who went to the empty table where a clutch of Rhodians gathered. Finally, Popara came forth, resplendent on a lift pad, flanked by his three female Twi'leks.
Gijibomabonamata,
said the elder hut, welcoming the collected species.
Chaubaso Padanki.
Rayan looked expectantly at Mander.
Gentle beings and fellow sentients,
translated Mander softly for the others.
Welcome to my home.
Jima Mojananyar Kodowin Mander Zuma Keja Jidai Ren Irana Bo Edibere Lomarin Geja Mokin Endregadi Gon Kodowin Pumba Malin.
He said,
Mander began, but Rayan interrupted.
I caught our names. Did he say thank you?
as much as a hut ever does,
said Mander.
He said our efforts were more than sufficient.
The Pantoran sniffed and scanned the tables.
Dibs on the Rhodians,
she said.
I want to see if I can shake something loose about the Bomus.
Mander nodded and let himself be guided to the table with the Syrians and a large female hut with a diamond insignia in her forehead. Eddie was seated with the Twi'leks and Bims. None of them sat at Xanos' table. A tall Syrian introduced the hut at Mander's table as Lungru Nokko, an old business associate of the Huttese clan. The tall Syrian himself was named Kir Sasad and was Lungru's chief advisor. There were a trio of Quarren at the table, but only one spoke basic, and that one with a sibilant lisp. When this Quarren translated the table conversation to the other two, her native language sounded much more delightful. Lungru, of course, only spoke in Huttese, and Mander could follow well enough, though Sasad would step in when Lungru slurred a colloquialism, or Mander had difficulty making a point. The female Hutt was particularly interested in their adventures on Endragod, and more than once referred to Mander as Mika's savior.
Such a child needs protectors,
said the Hutt.
Popara's youngest son seems more than brave and capable enough,
said Mander.
We had an incident earlier today. Came under sniper fire. He did not flinch in the face of that.
Lungru's eyes widened in surprise, and Mander added,
I believe our shooter was Syrian.
Lungru made a chortling noise and burbled in Huttese.
A Syrian? Do you recognize him at the table? Perhaps Kir Sasad here slipped away from my entourage to take a shot at Popara's favorite.
The Syrian advisor gave Mander a look as cold as deep space, but the Hutt continued, amused at her own joke.
Perhaps you snuck away when I was not looking. Eh, Kir Sasad?
Kir Sasad replied stonily.
I would never do anything without your orders, Lord Lungru.
But the Syrian's stare never left Mander. Lungru proceeded to say that she would never do anything so crass as to assassinate a rival before a dinner party, and noted that Mika being a target was not the young Hutt's fault after all.
Popara babies him. It happens to older Hutts. We get soft, sentimental. We miss opportunities. We don't take advantage. The Popara I remember was much stronger, much crueler. Now he is just old like me.
At that point, one of the Twi'lek handmaidens arrived and informed Lungru that Popara would see her. The female Hutt pushed herself away from the table, and the other Syrians followed the handmaiden up to the sliding doors. Kir Sasad brought up the rear. Popara's lift pad drifted back into the inner chamber, and the translucent walls slid into place. Popara was mixing business with pleasure, Mander realized, turning a celebratory feast into little more than a well-fed waiting room. The Quarren were having their own discussion, which did not include him. He looked around, and Rayan caught his eye and excused herself from Mika's table. She half collapsed into Kir Sasad's chair.
I need to trade seats,
she said.
How are your Rhodians?
Asked Mander.
They are accountants,
said Rayan, throwing as much venom as she could into the word.
They belong to the Kemu clan, and they are as dry as a desert world. I have never been as deeply bored in my life.
Mander managed a smile.
Poor Mika.
Rayan let out a frustrated snort.
Poor Mika. He apparently loves this sort of thing. They've been discussing the revised strictures on post-imperial import levies among the core worlds for the past half hour.
So, no luck then?
Rayan shook her head.
They know of the Bomu clan, but consider them clowns and incompetents. I couldn't really disagree about that, given their track record. They think smugglers go into the business because they can't handle the paperwork.
You should get back,
said Mander.
Here comes my table.
The wall-sized panels slid open, and Lungru slithered out, her entourage in tow. She looked like she hadn't had a good meeting, and on her way back to the table, snagged a hokum pipe from a serving tray and took a long, hard pull on it. The Syrians sat stone-faced as their mistress drew the smoke deep into her lungs. Even the Quarren were quiet. Lungru looked at Mander at length, then let out a torrent of Huttese, that Mander had trouble following. The Jedi looked at Kirsasad for a translation. The serious Syrian merely said,
You know about the Tempest spice.
Mander slowly nodded.
We encountered it on Endragod. It seems to be spreading through the galactic arm.
It is an opportunity.
Said the Syrian, and Lungru let out a snort that sounded like a mud bubble popping.
An opportunity that Popara is passing up.
Gotcha, Pofta.
Said the Hutt, which translated as,
He is getting soft.
It is a dangerous spice.
Said Mander.
All things are dangerous.
Said the Syrian, in a way that sounded like he included himself in that estimation.
It is here, on the smuggler's moon. The spice. We have seen it. And if anyone happens to know where it came from, how to manufacture it, who to talk to, well, that would be valuable information.
Kirsasad managed a toothy smile and leaned forward.
Very valuable.
Agreed.
Said Mander, leaning forward.
I would be interested myself in knowing those things. Keep me in mind.
To Lungru, he said, in butchered Huttese.
I will find out.
And he made it sound like a threat. Mander pushed himself back from the table, leaving Lungru sputtering and the Quarren giggling in his wake. The Rhodian accountants had had a brief meeting with Popara, and the other Hutt, Parella, was now ushered in. Rather than go rescue Rayen from further discussions of Republic-era precious metal policy, he stopped at Ede's table, where the Bothan was conversing with the Bim.
It is good to see someone is having a pleasant time,
said Mander. Eddie smiled.
The Bim here were rescued by one of Popara's ships, and have been negotiating to pay off the debt for that rescue. Since the food is pretty good here, they are in no hurry.
The Bim nodded, and held up some sod creepers roasted in their own shells.
And the Hutt at your table?
Asked Mander.
A strange one,
said Eddie.
His name is Parella, and he likes to hunt.
Hunt?
Said Mander.
Most Hutts are, well, slugs,
said Eddie.
Inert invertebrates. This one likes the thrill of bringing down his own kills. Has been going on at length about knocking whirlbats out of the sky on his estate on Nar Shada. He likes weapons of all sorts. Oh, and he's probably going to corner you about your blade.
My lightsaber?
Said Mander, the deactivated hilt feeling heavy at his side.
Why?
New weapon for him,
said Eddie.
He'll want to try it out.
A lightsaber can be dangerous in the wrong hands,
Mander replied.
Jedi study for years to master its nuances. Without the Force, it is dangerous to its user as well as to its opponent.
I told him something like that,
said the Bothan.
Needless to say, a Hutt hears nothing he doesn't want to. Have you noticed Zonos?
Despite himself, Mander turned to look at Popara's elder son, locking eyes with him across the room.
He's been staring at you for most of the evening,
said Eddie.
His Wookiees were irritated by me last time we met the Hutts, but now, nothing. They've been staring at you. And every time you do anything, Zonos just gets angrier. You're doing something to get his ponderous back up.
The Hutt's eyes narrowed, and one of the Wookiees said something, earning a cuff across the back of the head from the Hutt. Zonos looked, if anything, angrier and more dangerous than earlier. His thick, bluish hide seems to radiate rage and irritation. Mander turned back to Eddie. The Bothan said,
He probably doesn't know if you said anything to his father about the little chat you two had before we went to find Mika. Or what you will say.
Meaning?
Said Mander.
Meaning we could theorize that the target of this afternoon's assassination attempt was someone other than Mika,
said Eddie. Mander thought about it for a moment, then nodded. The panels to the back room opened, and Parella the Hunter emerged, a smile across his broad face. Did he get what he wanted, Mander wondered, or did he simply not want that much in the first place? Rayen, manifested at the Jedi's side, one of Popara's Twi'leks, visible behind her shoulder.
"We're up next,"
she said, and the Twi'lek motioned for the doors. They walked through the doorway, and Mander felt a tingling along his flesh, as if he had passed through a bubble made of static electricity. A force field, he realized, arranged to allow slower-moving bodies to pass through while deflecting energy weapons and probably high-caliber bullets. Popara was no fool, and was making sure just in case an assassin decided to send him a message in a more direct fashion. The hut was still stretched out on his repulsor lift, his Twi'lek servants ministering to his needs. One held the stem of an ornate hokum to his lips. A second stood to one side with a datapad. A third carried a large bowl with what looked like pale, wriggling worms.
"Bet he doesn't say thank you this time either,"
said Rayan softly, and Mander shushed her. Popara Hutase took a long, slow pull on the water pipe. Nodding at its Twi'lek bearer, she backed away, and the hut exhaled the smoke from his narrow nostrils. Then the hut unleashed a long torrent of hut teas.
Mibidoda jiskaja wonki Popara.
Popara was getting down to business at once. Mander caught the gist of it, but the Twi'lek confirmed his thoughts in translation.
"Mighty Popara bids you serve his family,"
said the Twi'lek, as Popara grabbed a fistful of pale white worms and stuffed them enthusiastically into his maw.
"His youngest son, Mika, has uncovered that the plague that trapped him on Endred God was tied into a new form of spice. A hard spice that thickens the mind and inflames the passion. Mighty Popara would never condone trade in such a spice, despite the urgings of others."
Here Popara swallowed his mouth full of worms and continued with another torrent of hut teas, hooting with each statement.
Mio Frida Mika, Baskata Gula Mazalus Tempest and Stukanta CSA.
The Tempest spice is throughout hut space and the galactic arm and is a bane to us all. Mighty Popara believes that young Mika found out enough to call attention to his actions, and those involved in the smuggling targeted him for elimination.
Popara, at this point, levied a long series of curses, many of which Mander knew, but several of which sounded extremely innovative. The Twi'lek chose to edit those out of her translation.
Grandio Popara no Hutasaka. Reis Crispos da Mikiuna da Dopa Miki Grancha Popara.
Popara will not have his family threatened. He has crushed his foes and left clan homes empty among those who have challenged him. For this reason, he wants to find out who is responsible for this new addiction on the worlds, so he may destroy them.
Popara patted his belly, let out a belch, and motioned for more worms. After downing another handful, he took a long drink from a crystal ewer and continued.
You are of similar mind, Mighty Popara thinks, as he is. The Jedi do not care for shackles, either on the body or on the mind.
Mighty Popara is correct in his assumption,
said Mander, in the best hut tease he could manage. Popara chuckled, and for a moment a pained look crossed his face. He motioned for the ewer, downed a healthy portion, then burbled another long speech.
Papa Popara, no want frita Mika no leia azalus. Mio vago takunchi wabda shimagusa.
The Twi'lek followed her master's words and translated.
Fatherly Popara does not wish his youngest son, so recently returned, to put himself at risk. Similarly, Vago is most competent, but Vago is like a daughter to him and should not be endangered either. Zonos is the eldest, and one does not imperil the family heir. You will investigate this matter on our behalf.
The Twi'lek with the datapad stepped forward and handed it to Mander.
This is a list of local tapcafes at which Vago determined that this Tempest was sold.
The second Twi'lek said.
Perhaps you will be able to trace the source or find our would-be assassin.
Mander slipped the datapad inside his robes and said simply,
It would be our honor to be of service.
Rayen started to say something, but Eddie nudged her with an elbow and she thought better of it. Popara started to say something,
Krancha Popara Dobra.
Then stopped, repeated himself,
Krancha Popara.
And let out an indecorous belch that took the Twi'leks aback. He started to say something else, but stopped again,
Hopache.
even as he seemed to sway for a moment on his repulsor lift. Then his eyes widened in pain and horror. Eddie said,
What's going on?
Mander didn't know, and crossed toward the great hut. It would normally be a transgression to approach him, but Popara was clearly in pain now. Popara's belly started to swell, and the great hut patron started to croak like an injured frog. The Twi'leks were clearly frightened, and one of them pushed Mander back, away from their master. Still, the hut's massive form expanded, his eyes wide with panic. His skin was stretched taut like a balloon about to pop. Rayen shouted,
I'll get help.
And turned back to the doors. They slid easily apart, and Mander realized what it would look like to the assembled party. Popara, in obvious pain, the Twi'lek shouting in fear, and the rest of them standing right in front of the hut's distended form.
Rayen, don't!
Mander said, but Eddie grabbed him and pulled him to one side. Popara was almost ovoid in shape now, and screaming in a low, throaty roar. And then the flesh gave way in half a dozen places, and Popara exploded, his organs rupturing in all directions around the room. The Twi'leks screamed, diving for cover, and Rayen was flung forward by the power of the explosion and bounced off the force field. Along with the former hut patriarch's interior organs. Both the Pantoran and the hut's digestive system were moving too fast to allow the screen to let them pass. There was silence for a moment, and Mander looked out at the assembled guests. Hut and Quarren, Bim and Rodian, Wookiee and Syrian. All of them looked at the gory tableau beyond the open doors in shock. It was only for a moment, but Mander felt his heart hammer from the certain knowledge of what was to come. Then, Zonos shouted in a drunken bellow,
They killed my father. Death to the Jedi and his allies.